Hello, I am Dr. Joseph Olmert, and throughout my entire academic career, which lasted for over 4 decades, I have been engaged in Syrian and Lebanese affairs in various capacities as an academic, also as a government official, and even as a peace negotiator at one time between Israel and Syria way back after the Madrid Peace Conference of 1991 and in 1992. And therefore, my entire career has always had to do with a member of the Assad family, whether it was the old dictator, Hafez Assad, and then later on his younger son dictator, Bashar Assad. So obviously, when people talk about the end of an era in Syria, it is also an end of an era for me in terms of dealing with Syria. And all this introduction is only because it gives me, I believe, a good perspective to analyze what's happening in Syria in the context of so many years of dealing with the issues of Syria. Right now, after I retired from the University of South Carolina, I am a senior associate member, I should say, of the great Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Public Policy, a great place, a think tank, in which there is a lot of knowledge and expertise. So let me now get into the situation in Syria and tell you that this video, there will be a few more that I'm going to post in the next few days. This video is really about the overall historic context of the change in Syria. And I would make, to start with, the point that throughout the modern history of Syria, basically from 1920, when the French took over and established their mandatory regime in Syria, and then the independence of Syria in 1946, Syria has been in a search for collective identity, for its role under the sun of the Middle East or the Arab world. Syria was in a lookout for a definition of what country it is, what is the Syrian people, or to put it more simply, who we are, what we are. And there have been a lot of attempts at creating this collective identity that would enable Syria to persist and maintain itself as a stable country. And one should say, exactly after what happened in the last few days in Syria, that yet another attempt failed. So from 1946 to 1949, 3 years of parliamentary democracy, Syrian style, but still democracy. There were elections. Then was the defeat to Israel in the war of 1948, when Syria invaded Israel to prevent the establishment of Israel, and came the 3 military coups d'etat of 1949 and the 5 years of the Shishakli dictatorship until 1954, in which there was this attempt to make good on this traditional Syrian slogan and belief, ideological belief of Syria as the heart of Arabism, al-Qalbul Uruba, as they say it in Arabic. Then for 4 years, from 1954 to 1958, again 4 years of parliamentary democracy, which failed. The Syrian state collapsed. That led to the union with Egypt. The breakup of the union with Egypt in 1961. And after 1963, the rise of the Ba'ath Party to control in Syria. And again, there are 2 stages of the Ba'ath Party here, because from 1963 to 1970, it was more or less what they called the neo-Ba'ath, and then came the Assad sole dictatorship as of 1970. And as we see now, after 54 years of this dictatorship, it also failed. The attempt to create a community that will be based on a sense of collective pride in being Syrians and Arabs, overlooking, surpassing the problem that really besets Syria, that they haven't yet found a solution to it, and this is, of course, the sectarian issue. The sectarian issue, which has to do with the fact that Syria is a collection of ethnicities and religions. And what makes it even worse from a Syrian perspective is that some of those minorities, say the Kurds in the northeast, the Druze in the southwest, and even the Alawis in the northwest, have been what they used to call compact minorities. They were really having their own particular territory. And all these divisions that existed historically were exacerbated, there's no question about it, by the French mandatory authorities, particularly with the rise of the Alawis, the minority that was always despised and looked down at for all kinds of religious reasons, to the position that enabled them later on to take Syria over militarily and establish the dictatorship that just crumbled now, this a few days ago. So all these regimes that we talked about were regimes based on the idea that there should be some kind of a political community that would be based on the sense that people share common values that will be strong enough to create this political community. But that didn't work. It did not work. All those regimes that we talked about failed. Then came the Ba'ath regime, pan-Arab nationalism. First of all, it was the socialist neo-Ba'ath, and then the less socialist, but still the pan-Arabist, the national Arab regime of Hafez Assad, with also the idea of developing or promoting again the sense of the ideology of Greater Syria, but this time under the leadership of the Ba'ath Party, in cooperation, by the way, with the pan-Syrian movement that was established by Anton Saada, historically two rival ideologies, but they have cooperated since then, basically until the last few days, And it seemed for a while that Assad succeeded. And of course, the question was, how did he do it? There are all kinds of explanations to it. We shall not get into all this, but the bottom line of it was that he did it through the use of a lot of force. He did not create a real, legitimate regime that surpassed the sectarian differences, whether religious, whether ethnic. He basically forced upon the Syrian people a dictatorship, the way, by the way, it was done by the Ba'ath counterparts in Iraq, by Saddam Hussein, even though they were always on a collision course between the two wings of the Ba'ath party, the use of unlimited brutal force. And one has to bear in mind that it seemed like Syria became stable. And of course, we can always debate what is the price of stability, but the notion of stability crumbled in the Arab world already before the Arab Spring, and definitely in the Arab Spring and afterwards. The idea that you can enforce stability by the use of unlimited, unmitigated force, brutal force, without creating the real ideology that allows people to feel that they are members of the same community of civilians, of citizens, and they are members of the same community because they share common values. This basic Western notion has never existed in Syria. And the problem is that even the rulers of Syria did not realize that. On the 30th of January 2011, when there is already Arab Spring in Tunisia, in Libya, and it started in Egypt. So Bashar Assad gave a big interview to the Wall Street Journal in which he said, it's not going to happen to me because people like my regime. It's a legitimate regime. Oh, really? And why was it a legitimate regime? Because we are anti-Israel and anti-American. People like it. 6 weeks later, the Syrian civil war started. All right, so this is not about the history of the Syrian civil war, which is in itself a very interesting topic. It, by the way, has to do with something that I will deal with in another of my videos, and this is a video about the role of intelligence in all that is happening. How come that even a dictator like Bashar Assad thought in late January of 2011 that he is safe, and 6 weeks later he found out, or started to find out, that he was not? How come that these days, until a few weeks ago, we did not know, or at least those who are taking their education and knowledge and understanding from leaks to the press by governments, by intelligence services in the West, and also in Israel. We'll talk about that. And also in Israel, what was going to happen that just ended up a few days ago in Syria. So that's another story. So we come now to the stage where Islamism is taking over Syria. Islamism is not a new movement in Syria. The Muslim Brotherhood were popular in Syria in places like Hama and Homs already in the 1930s. In the 70s, when there was this rebellion against Hafez Assad, 76 to 82, the Muslim Brotherhood, with all the factions surrounding them, around them, were the ones who did what almost brought down the regime at that time, until we come to the end of February, the beginning of March 1982, with a terrible massacre in Hama with 30 or 40,000 people murdered by the Assad regime through the so-called defense battalions led by his brother Rifat Assad, the uncle of Bashar Assad, brother of Hafiz Assad. So Islamism is not new in Syria. The difference is, or two major differences this time. One of them is the connection between the most important group of the Islamists, which took over now, the HTS, the Ayat Tahrir Bilad al-Sham, or Ayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Council for the Liberation of Asham, and we'll talk about the word Asham in a minute. It's important. They are Syrians, but they are mostly under Turkish influence. There was no such clear connection between the Islamists of the 70s and a neighboring Arab or Islamic country. The second difference is that the current movement in Syria are jihadists by definition. It's part of the overall trend of jihadist Islamism that we have witnessed in the Middle East, among the Shias and also among the Sunnis. Now, Al-Julani, Abu Muhammad Al-Julani, makes all the nice statements now. Just a few hours ago, I read that they made another statement in which they cautioned their people not to interfere with the way women are dressed up, which is an indication of moderation and also an hint towards the Iranian regime as to the difference between us and them. Is Syria going now to exercise a period of Islamic regime as yet another attempt designed to create a new basis of collective national solidarity in this state? Apparently it is going to. How long it will be? Well, it's difficult to predict. I would not be among those who say that this is the beginning of a long era of Islamic regime in Syria. It's too early to say that. I would not rule it out. But what I'm trying to tell you is, by way of connecting where we started and the end of this particular video episode, there will be more about Syria, there will be more, I promise you, there will be more, is that we are witnessing now the beginning of another attempt at giving a collective identity to a state and people that otherwise historically have been divided by sectarianism of all kinds, an attempt to give them a new collective identity that will be accepted and legitimate. Too early to tell what will be the result of all that, but not too early to say that the very fact that we need to even mention all that after so many years of Syrian independence, this is the exact evidence showing that the very creation of Syria in its current borders with this combination of populations has always been a problem and been the basic fundamental problem that led to the chronic instability, civil wars, violence, and the rise and downfall of various regimes that represented different concepts and ideologies. To all my viewers, this is just the first time that we give this video about what's happening in Syria. There will be more, and hopefully you will watch it and enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week. Peace upon all of you. Thank you.